A deafening roar filled the sky as Zephyr 9 plunged like a comet into the atmosphere of Carthes, igniting a halo of orange and blue flames around its hull. The vessel shuddered violently, its structural integrity screaming protest through tortured metal as it pierced layers of dense clouds. Inside, alarms wailed, flashing crimson alerts against walls now illuminated only by flickering emergency lights. Myral Keen's vision blurred, the impact throwing her violently forward. Her helmet cracked sharply against the control panel. For a heartbeat, everything faded to black. Consciousness returned with a surge of agony, and she coughed, tasting blood and smoke. The acrid scent of burning circuitry and melting plastics seared her lungs. She pushed against the harness restraints, muscles trembling with exertion. Structural integrity at 12%, a synthesized voice calmly announced amidst the chaos, maddeningly devoid of urgency. Myral cursed under her breath, punching desperately at the controls. Nothing responded. The console was dead, cold beneath her bleeding fingers. Another brutal jolt shook the Zephyr 9 as it crashed through towering alien trees, splintering branches thicker than any she'd seen. Myral closed her eyes, bracing herself as her entire world shattered in a storm of twisted metal and razor-sharp debris. The noise stopped. The silence was disorienting, an eerie vacuum after the storm. Myral opened her eyes again. Darkness. Forcing down panic, she groped for the release latch of her harness. It resisted at first, damaged and warped by heat. She twisted and wrenched with frantic strength born of desperation. With a sharp click, it finally yielded, and Myral fell forward onto the warped deck plating. Sharp pain shot through her legs. Looking down, she saw blood seeping through her torn uniform. She grimaced, steeling herself against the stabbing sensation as she staggered upright, using the console for support. Through the cracked visor of her helmet, she assessed her surroundings. Smoke hung thickly, dimly lit by intermittent sparks. The aft section was obliterated, and jagged fragments jutted inward like metallic bones. Myral stepped forward carefully, every breath a sharp knife in her chest. Reaching an emergency locker on the bulkhead, she pried it open, her fingers trembling. Inside, most equipment was crushed, but the portable life scanner flickered weakly with residual power. She activated it, holding her breath as its dim screen illuminated. No life signs detected, it stated bluntly, coldly. Crew status deceased. Her stomach lurched. Myral fought down nausea and the creeping dread that threatened to consume her. She was alone, stranded, wounded, on a planet only briefly catalogued in passing surveys. Pulling her helmet free, Myral inhaled deeply, coughing immediately at the pungent air. Carthes' atmosphere was breathable, but barely. She felt a sharp, metallic tang at the back of her throat. The taste of alien vegetation and unknown spores. She'd survive for now, but her throat burned with each painful gasp. Stepping cautiously through the twisted wreckage, Myral reached a tier in the hull and pushed aside tangled wiring. Emerging onto Carthes itself for the first time, the sight momentarily stunned her. The forest stretched out endlessly, massive trees glowing faintly with phosphorescent bioluminescence, twisting trunks. Like ancient, gnarled sentinels, above the stars were foreign constellations, cold and indifferent. The alien jungle was alive with soft murmurs and distant cries that felt vaguely predatory. She raised the life scanner again, hoping for any beacon, distress signal, or approaching rescue team. Instead, the screen flickered erratically before pulsing urgently. Warning, heat signatures detected. It flashed ominously, blinking rapidly. Myral's heart froze as 12 distinct markers lit up around her. She spun in every direction, eyes wide, searching desperately through the darkness, but nothing moved. Nothing visible anyway. "What the hell are you?" she whispered, her voice breaking with tension. The forest offered no response. Sweat dripped down her forehead, mingling with soot and blood. She clenched her jaw. The silent, invisible threats closed steadily in a tightening ring. Each signature pulsed closer, slow, deliberate movements, utterly silent. She retreated quickly into the shattered vessel, pulling debris and crates into makeshift barricades. Her mind raced, scanning her options. The damaged reactor core of the Zephyr 9 was still glowing faintly, spewing weak radiation that made the hairs on her neck prickle. Her engineer's instincts sparked to life. "I can use this," she muttered to herself, moving swiftly toward the damaged engine. Despite her injuries, adrenaline fueled her movements, sharp and decisive. She hauled a severed radiation conduit from beneath scorched metal, yanking it free with raw determination. Dragging it toward the breach in the hull, she felt its energy thrum dangerously through her insulated gloves. The life scanner beeped frantically now, an escalating rhythm that matched her pounding heart. Myrle positioned the leaking conduit toward the outer darkness, radiation bleeding invisibly from the damaged end. Her voice echoed defiantly into the silent jungle. "If you want to feast on the dead, you'll taste ashes first." There was no immediate response, just the unsettling quiet that pressed against her nerves like a physical weight. But the faint rustle of leaves whispered closer, and the scanner's screen lit again, this time pulsing wildly. Myrle felt her fingers tighten painfully around the conduit. They were here, invisible and ravenous, sensing her warmth, her fear. She steadied herself, poised at the edge of the shadows, a trembling silhouette defiant before unknown monsters. Her mind screamed for her to flee, but she had nowhere to go. The jungle belonged to the invisible stalkers now circling slowly, savoring her terror. As sweat traced icy paths down her back, Myrle steeled herself, her engineer's mind now only calculating escape vectors, defensive maneuvers, and radiation dispersal patterns. She knew these creatures wouldn't understand her words, might not even perceive her as sentient, but in her soul burned a furious determination to defy whatever savage cruelty this world had conjured. The screen flickered once more. Distances vanished as invisible bodies drew nearer. Myrle Keene, engineer of Zephyr 9, a survivor by instinct and choice, lifted her chin defiantly. Staring down the encroaching darkness she could not see, but undeniably felt. "I'm not going quietly," she growled into the shadows, daring the invisible horrors forward. And at the jungle's silent edge, 12 unseen forms paused momentarily, hesitating before the alien energy seeping from her improvised weapon. A heartbeat passed in mutual uncertainty. Then, with chilling purpose, they resumed their approach, committed now to a deadly confrontation beneath alien stars. Myrle Keene had never intended to survive her past. That was the cruel trick of it all. She had built weapons precise enough to silence planets. Yet when it came to silencing memory, she found herself powerless. She was 27, once the youngest senior bioweapons engineer in the Western Lunar Federation. She had authored algorithms that taught nanites how to mimic viral phages. She designed neural disruptors that pulsed in the same rhythm as human empathy, tools meant to dismantle a mind from the inside out without shedding a single drop of blood. They had called her brilliant. She called herself dangerous. Then came the ST year. The war had arrived not with explosions but with silence, waves of silence that bent thought itself. The ST year, an alien species without discernible biology, communicated and fought using something humans could barely define. Psychic resonance. They didn't fire weapons, they invaded perception. One day, a squad of Federation commandos stopped moving mid-mission and started weeping uncontrollably. The next, 3 planetary colonies vanished from the grid, their residents left mumbling poems in dead dialects. Her father had been one of the first to fall, a xenopsychologist on the diplomatic front line. He'd volunteered to speak with the ST. What returned wasn't her father. It was a man with eyes that saw nothing, and hands that trembled even in sleep. 2 months later, his heart stopped, not because of any attack, but because whatever tethered him to hope had been cut. Myrle never forgave herself, not because she had caused his death, but because she hadn't been able to stop the machine she helped create. Her weapons didn't work on the ST. Nothing did. Her life's work, tools of precise destruction, were suddenly obsolete. In her chest bloomed a quiet fury, not at the enemy but at herself. So she left. She filed a transfer from R&D to logistical support, something everyone called a waste of talent. To Myrle, it was escape. She joined the transport corps with no ambition beyond hauling boxes of stabilizers and nutritional gel packs across forgotten sectors. In the transport corps, no one asked questions. No one cared what you used to be. Now, 2 years later, she was on the Zephyr 9, an aging cargo freighter destined for Outpost Helix on the fringes of the Carthy system. The assignment was routine: transport mineral scanners, hydration modules, and atmospheric calibrators. She barely looked at the manifest. She barely spoke to the crew. She was used to being alone, even in the company of others. But silence, she learned, was not a sanctuary. It was an invitation. They were 2 days from the drop zone when it began. She was in the subdeck, running diagnostics on a damaged fusion coil, when the lights dimmed and the floor shuddered beneath her boots. At first she thought it was a system spike, but then the walls pulsed, not mechanically, but rhythmically, like something breathing. Then came the voices, not voices exactly, but thoughts that didn't belong to her. Emotions without triggers, echoes of terror that didn't originate in her mind, yet somehow lived inside it. The crew reacted in panic. Some screamed, some laughed. One man sat still, humming a lullaby with blood dripping from his nose. Myrle sprinted to the bridge, where the captain was slumped over his console, staring at static. No alarms, no enemy ships, no visual anomalies, only interference thick and pressing like a wet cloth over the brain. She recognized the pattern too late. It was reflection interference asterisk, a phenomenon identified during the ST campaigns. Not quite a psychic assault, not quite a signal, more like a loop, a mental echo chamber that made thoughts fold back on themselves until identity collapsed. She tried to override the navigational AI, but the ship was already drifting. Orbit decayed. The planet pulled them down. There was no emergency escape. No beacon fired. In the final moments, she strapped herself into an auxiliary seat in the lower compartment, sealed her suit, and waited. The crash came like a judgment. When she awoke hours later, wrapped in twisted harnesses and smoke, everything she had tried to run from came rushing back: memories, guilt, and that old question, why did I survive? It wasn't luck. The lower decks were reinforced for cargo stability. But Myrle couldn't shake the irony. The engineer who had once designed weapons too precise to fail had now become cargo herself, discarded, unwanted, and alone. Her mind tried to stay clinical. Assess damage, catalog injuries, prioritize oxygen. But something else pulsed beneath the surface, a cold voice she had buried years ago. They died because of you. Again, she ignored it. Instead, she crawled out of the wreckage, lips cracked, legs sliced open from the knees down. Her boots were soaked in blood by the time she reached the edge of the crash site. But pain was secondary. What mattered was movement. Stillness meant death, not just of body but of purpose. She made a temporary shelter inside the broken hull of the Zephyr 9. Patched together oxygen filters, salvaged med packs, and 2 protein cartridges. Then she powered up the scanner. It found nothing human. But it found something else. 12 heat signatures, moving in slow formation, circling her location. Silent, invisible, deliberate, she didn't know what they were. Predators, natives, leftover constructs from a SD-year installation, she didn't care. What mattered was simple: she was alone, and if these creatures wanted her dead, they'd learn, like everyone else had, that Myral Keen was not so easy to erase. She had made weapons that could kill empathy. Now she would make survival into one. Myral turned the broken hull of the Zephyr 9 tail section into her sanctuary. Or more accurately, into something that felt less like a coffin. The metal had fused and warped in the crash, forming a crude arch over what used to be the auxiliary storage bay. She cleared out the debris, pushed aside twisted crates, and set up a thermal tarp from the emergency kit to insulate herself from the cold, damp breath of Carthy's night. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. It would have to do. No weapons remained. The ship's small arms locker had been vaporized in the explosion that ripped through Deck C. All she had now were engineering tools: a plasma cutter, a fusion spanner, and a pack of maintenance drones with limited charge. And 3 partially damaged energy cores, each leaking small but unstable pulses of ionized heat. Myral wasn't a soldier anymore, but she knew how to improvise. She embedded 2 cores beneath the outer perimeter, connecting them to crude trip lines made of tensile fiber and sensor nodes. Primitive deterrents, maybe, but they gave her warning. The 3rd core she kept close, wrapped in heat-dampening cloth. It might be her last bargaining chip, against the environment, the creatures. Or herself. As dusk fell, she sat outside the wreckage, her back against the cold alloy wall. The portable scanner in her lap glowing faintly. She didn't know what she was waiting for, rescue maybe. But in her gut, she already knew better. Carthy's was a planet deemed unsuitable for colonization. Too unstable, too wild. The only reason they even passed by it was to slingshot into deeper trade routes. No one's coming, she thought. Not soon. The forest before her moved with its own slow rhythm. The trees didn't sway with wind. There was no wind. They moved as if, exhaling, a biological motion almost too slow to see. Massive vines curled subtly upward, responding not to weather but perhaps to sound. Or heat. She realized then what felt off. The jungle wasn't just alive, it was aware. Leaves shimmered unnaturally when her eyes weren't focused on them. Shafts of twilight refracted strangely through the canopy. Shadows warped when nothing had moved. Then something shifted in her peripheral vision, just a flicker. Like a heat mirage gone as soon as she turned her head. She narrowed her eyes, bending light, not camouflage. Not a trick of her mind, adaptive refraction, they're invisible. She switched the scanner to passive thermal mode and swept the tree line. Again, 12 faint heat signatures glowed in scattered formation. All stationary, all outside her perimeter, all watching. They hadn't moved since the first night. That made her nervous. Predators didn't wait this long unless they were studying their prey. Suddenly, a sharp beeping interrupted her thoughts. She glanced down. The emergency beacon tucked beneath a damaged comms module had powered on. She hadn't activated it. It had triggered automatically. Likely as a failsafe after the onboard diagnostics, ran a delayed integrity check. Broadcasting signal, the screen flashed. A continuous ping began to pulse, broadcasting Federation distress frequencies. Her heart leapt, then sank. This signal wasn't strong enough to pierce orbit. But it was strong enough to attract attention nearby. She dove for the controls and disabled the broadcast, silencing the signal instantly. The sudden quiet rang even louder than the pulse. Too late. From the edge of her vision, heat signatures twitched. 2 of them broke formation, drifting closer, not charging. Just repositioning. She whispered under her breath, "I've made noise." There was no sense in running, no other safe zone. She backed into the shelter, reset her trip sensors, and sat in the darkness, clutching the scanner like a lifeline. That was when the smell hit her. Char, not smoke, not fresh blood. The scent of something cooked, overheated organic matter. She stepped to the edge of the tarp and saw it, just outside the perimeter, 20 meters away. Something lay slumped against the base of a tree. Cautious, she moved closer. It was a carcass. At first, she thought it was a native animal. Then she saw the shape, long limbs, jointed too many times. Skin, or what remained of it, was charred into a skeletal framework, as if something inside had burst from heat. There were no signs of a fight, no blood trail, no wounds. Just spontaneous destruction from within. No scavengers had touched it. She crouched next to it, carefully scanning. There were no active pathogens, no radiation, but something else registered faintly, residual electromagnetic distortion in the surrounding air. It wasn't natural. Something had killed this thing and done so with precision. She whispered to herself, not out of fear but calculation. Something's hunting asterisked them. It should have been a relief. It was, because that meant another variable in play. One that didn't care if she was human or not. She dragged the body closer and laid it near the perimeter, carefully. Without touching its exposed tissues, she needed to study its decay. Its weaknesses, its physiology. It was a clue, a message. Or a warning. That night she didn't sleep. The jungle grew louder as the sun dipped behind the western ridge. The air thickened, pressing down on her lungs like wet cotton. Every few minutes, her sensors clicked softly as heat blooms appeared and vanished. But the worst came in the lull between midnight and dawn. A sound, soft, inconsistent, barely audible over the jungle's breaths. It was the sound of feet bare, slow, careful, stepping onto warped metal. Just outside the hall, Myrle froze. Every nerve screamed to move, to attack, to hide, but she did none of those things. She simply listened, because whoever or whatever was walking out there wasn't testing her defenses anymore. It was learning the shape of her home. By the fourth night, Myrle stopped hoping they'd leave. She had accepted that the Stalkers weren't mindless predators. They were deliberate, patient, intelligent in a way that wasn't human but not alien either. Something in between, like the jungle had shaped them not just to kill but to observe first. So she adapted. The damaged radiation cores she'd salvaged once threats became tools. She disassembled the housings, redirecting low-frequency heat pulses into looped signal bursts, mimicking the thermal output of a living organism. Using sensor feedback, she scattered these thermal decoys around the crash site, each calibrated to a slightly different signature, heartbeat variance, fluctuating core temperature, subtle respiratory vibrations. To anything hunting by short-range biological sonar, it would look like a dozen creatures were moving around the perimeter. It worked for a time. The Stalkers kept their distance, circling with hesitation. She watched their heat signatures pause, cluster, retreat, then return in strange, silent formations. They were asterisks studying her traps, not with brute force but with memory. On the sixth night, the testing began. One of them approached the far corner of the wreckage, where she'd placed a dummy node wrapped in insulating gel. It stepped into the false heat bloom and paused. Myrle's scanner lit up with a sudden spike. The creature emitted a short-range pulse. A ripple of pressure rolled over her camp, triggering every proximity sensor in a 10-meter radius. Then just as suddenly, the signal vanished. By the time she looked back, the decoy was scorched, melted from the inside. Something about the pulse had unraveled its core integrity. They weren't just mapping her defenses. They were asterisk diagnosing them. That night she barely slept. She stayed crouched in the shadows of the broken bulkhead, running recalibrations, trying to stay ahead of the unknown intelligence creeping closer each day. By morning she found footprints, actual impressions in the soil, not shaped like feet but spiraled asymmetric, like the tendrils of deep-sea creatures fossilized in ash. They circled her encampment 3 times, close, too close. On the 7th night they crossed the line. The warning system never triggered. The creatures came in low, crawling perhaps, or weaving through root systems beneath the surface. By the time Myrle noticed the missing signals, it was already too late. She stepped outside and froze. Her small animal enclosure, where she'd kept 3 of the native scavenger beasts she'd slowly domesticated, was torn open. The animals lay scattered like discarded toys, their bodies untouched by teeth or claw. No blood, no struggle, just stillness, dead but not consumed. Myrle knelt beside them, her hand hovering over one of the corpses. Their eyes were still open, pupils dilated, lips curled slightly. They hadn't died in pain. They had died in asterisk shock. A psychological kill. She staggered backward, her heart pounding, not out of fear, but from a sickening realization. They weren't testing her traps. They were testing her asterisk. How do you respond when something innocent dies in front of you? She whispered aloud, the question bitter in her mouth. Not for food, not for dominance, not for territory. For observation. It wasn't predation, it was a moral experiment. And she was the lab rat. The thought shook her more than she wanted to admit. She returned to the shelter, bolted the entry, and sat motionless for hours, watching the scanner as the creatures resumed their slow patrol. Something cracked inside her that night, not fear, not rage. Something colder, a kind of surrender to the nature of the game. If they wanted a reaction, they would get one, but not the one they expected. On the 8th night something changed. It was almost dawn. The forest had quieted. The scanner registered only 4 faint signals, distant and non-moving. Myrle allowed herself a moment to lower her guard, just enough to drink a pouch of recycled water. That's when she heard it, a soft cry. It wasn't an animal's howl. It wasn't the shifting of trees. It was unmistakably human. A asterisk child asterisk, high-pitched, strangled, a voice broken by pain or fear. Myrle froze. She stood up, weaponless, and stepped into the fog beyond her perimeter. The scanner vibrated softly in her hand, but she ignored it. The sound was coming from just beyond the collapsed wing of the ship. She turned the corner and saw it, a small figure, huddled in the dirt. Pale skin, torn clothing, shivering violently, a girl no older than 10. Hair tangled, barefoot. She looked up at Myrle with wide, tear-filled eyes and said in a broken whisper, "Please help me." Myrle's stomach turned. Every part of her screamed that this couldn't be real. There were no humans on Carthes, no colonies, no crash signals but hers. And yet the child crawled forward, reaching out, hands shaking. Dirt clung to her cheeks. "I'm lost," she cried. "They chased me. They killed the others." Myrle didn't move. Then the scanner beeped once, soft and sudden. The heat signature of the child spiked erratically, flashing too fast for anything human. It was shifting, glitching, and in that moment the illusion faltered. The girl's face flickered, not physically but perceptually. The eyes remained wide and helpless, but beneath them, something asterisk watched. A presence, a consciousness, something that knew what a child should asterisk look like when scared. Knew what tone to speak in, knew exactly how to tilt the head in sorrow. Because it had asterisk seen asterisk it before. It had asterisk studied asterisk it. The predator had become the prey, but in disguise. Myrle stepped back slowly, pulse pounding. She didn't reach for a weapon. She didn't run. Instead, she spoke quietly. "What happens if I help you?" The child didn't answer. Just whimpered, "What happens if I kill you?" Still silence. Myrle took one more step forward and crouched. "Which answer do you want from me?" she asked. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the girl curled up, covering her face with tiny hands, and sobbed. And this time it felt real, not mimicry, not simulation, but something breaking from within the thing pretending to be fragile. She didn't know if it was dying, or evolving, or begging. And that, more than anything, shattered her balance. Because for the first time since the crash, she wasn't sure what she was looking at. A trap, a test, a child, or the first honest reflection of a species trying to understand what mercy looks like. And the terrible question followed. If I kill this thing now, will it prove to them that we are the monsters? The night of the 11th day came without wind, without warning, without stars. The jungle exhaled its heat in long, slow pulses, like lungs expanding beneath the soil. The trees no longer swayed. They stood motionless, their bioluminescent veins dimmed to a dull greenish pulse. It was as if the entire planet was holding its breath. Inside the hollow shell of the Zephyr 9 aft, Miles sat still, cross-legged. The broken casing of the reactor core spread before her like the remnants of a bomb she had no right to touch. Her hands moved without hesitation. She knew what she was building. What it would do, what it would cost. The camp was surrounded. She didn't need the scanner anymore to know. The silence outside was too perfect. Even the smallest creatures had vanished. No clicking insects, no rustling underbrush, no glimmers of movement among the trees. Only the presence of them remained, the Stalkers. 12 signatures, no longer scattered, no longer waiting. She could feel them pressing against the perimeter, patient, absolute, closing in with finality. Her traps had stopped working. They had learned. Now they were here to end it. Myral didn't flinch. She kept wiring, her breath shallow and controlled. The core she'd extracted was barely stable, charred in the crash, casing fractured, coolant long since evaporated. But it still hummed with volatile ion radiation. She defused it with a layered biological filter salvaged from the ship's medical bay, designed originally to shield injured tissue from synthetic light therapies. Now it would do the opposite. The filter concentrated the radiation into a single emission point, like a lens focusing. Sunlight, but deadlier. No blast, no explosion. Just a burst of ionized heat, invisible and targeted. Enough to burn through any known organic structure within its range. She'd set the range to 40 meters. That included half the jungle in front of her camp. She finished the final connection. The core hissed once, glowing with unstable light. And beside her, the child-shaped creature whimpered. It had remained by her side since that night, never attacked. Never spoke again. It ate nothing, slept little, curled against the corner like a broken toy. Watching her with those two wide eyes that always seemed 2 heartbeats behind real emotion. She hadn't killed it, and yet something in her had been waiting to. Now she stood above it. It looked up, hollow and afraid. And Myra wondered, for the 1000th time, what lay beneath its imitation of humanity. Was it a spy, a mistake, a plea, or was it something else entirely, a message she hadn't learned to read? "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking despite herself. The creature blinked. She opened the shielded door and gestured toward the jungle. "Go," it hesitated. Then slowly it crawled to its feet and limped into the open. Its form shimmered, fractured at the edges, like a projection struggling to maintain itself. Halfway across the clearing, its legs transformed, elongating, jointing backward. Its arms split at the forearm into tendrils. By the time it reached the tree line, it was no longer a child. It was one of them, but smaller. It paused at the threshold between light and darkness, turning its head back. For one long moment, the creature didn't move. Myral's finger hovered over the activation node. Her eyes locked on the figure she had sent to die. The question stabbed at her one final time. What am I choosing to become? The creature disappeared into the jungle. Seconds passed. The sensors spiked. 11 heat signatures converged toward the returning form, shifting patterns of motion like a school of sharks encircling blood. Myra waited. Her hand trembled. Then one signal crossed the threshold. She pressed the switch. There was no explosion, no thunder. No scream from metal, just light. A burst of invisible energy washed outward from the reactor's core. Its radiation sharpened through the biological filter like a laser, through a magnifying lens. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the jungle shrieked. Not with sound, but with matter. Vines bursting into flame, tree trunks blistering with unseen fire. A column of heatless color ignited the underbrush in a spiral of pale blue and silver. Creatures, seen and unseen, jerked violently as their forms collapsed under the focused radiation. Then silence. When the light faded, the world had changed. Half the jungle before her was gone. Trees lay scorched, roots peeled back like burned nerves. The ground glistened with melted sap and cracked stone. In the middle of it all, nothing moved. No heat signatures remained. Only ash. Myra lowered her hand. Her ears rang with absence. She stepped outside the wreckage and walked forward, boots crunching softly over soot and bone. The air was dry, acrid with the scent of sterilization. Whatever had lived in this part of the jungle was no longer there. In the center of the devastation, she saw something small, half buried beneath the scorched remains of what might once have been a tree. She knelt. It was the child creature. Its body half formed, half revealed, one side still mimicking human flesh, the other exposed, translucent tissue, glistening nerves, unfamiliar architecture. Its eye, just one, remained open. It no longer shimmered with mimicry. It was just watching, dying, or maybe just finally still. Myra sat beside it. No scanner, no armor, no defense. Just a woman on a planet that had asked her one question too many. "I chose to live," she whispered, "but I lived like what?" No answer came. The forest made no sound. The sky remained indifferent. She sat there until the fire cooled, until her breath slowed, until the truth settled like dust in her throat. She had survived, but she was not victorious, and in the silence of the dead jungle, with the ghosts of 12 invisible creatures turned to memory, Myra Keene, engineer fugitive, unwilling executioner, understood something colder than survival. She had won, but not as a human. 7 days passed before the rescue ship pierced the sky above Carthes. It descended in silence, its gleaming hull reflecting the smoldered edge of the jungle where Myra Keene waited. By then the planet had gone still, unnaturally so. No calls of native wildlife, no flickers of movement among the bioluminescent vines. The forest had grown quiet in a way that suggested absence, not peace. The landing team found her seated at the edge of the blast zone, a makeshift shelter behind her. The charred remains of the Zephyr 9, barely recognizable beneath vines, already attempting to reclaim it. Her suit was torn, her boots melted at the soles, but her eyes were calm. She didn't speak when they approached. She didn't stand. She simply looked up once, met their gaze, and said, "There are no hostiles left. But don't touch the soil, it remembers." The official report was clinical. Asterisk subject, Myra Keene, engineer, Western Lunar Federation. Survival duration, 19 standard days. Status, stable. Environmental zone, level 4 biohazard, observation. Subject used localized ionized radiation field to neutralize Class X adaptive predators. Casualties, none. Conclusion, survival attributed to exceptional improvisation under extreme duress. They flew her back to the outer ring for decontamination. Federation protocols demanded isolation, interviews, psychological evaluations. But Myra denied all requests for media appearances. She refused medals, commendations, and a full military reinstatement offered in recognition of extraordinary resilience. She submitted a single sentence for her debrief: "I survived." That is all. Then she disappeared. For 3 weeks no one saw her. Rumors spread. Some said she had been transferred to a secure research facility. Others believed she'd resigned and returned to civilian life. Most simply forgot, in a cycle where hundreds of crises competed daily for attention. One lone survivor on a forgotten jungle world faded quickly into background noise. But one evening, long after the headlines had shifted elsewhere, Myra walked alone into a restricted lab on orbital station Allura 6. Swiped a clearance card no one knew she still possessed, and entered the black archive. Inside, everything smelled sterile: cold light, polished steel, silence manufactured by design. She moved with purpose, unaccompanied. Her destination was a single workstation, nestled deep in the archival wing, where fragments from the Zephyr 9 black box had been uploaded during recovery. Most of the data was corrupted, environmental logs warped by radiation, audio drowned in static. But the internal cam feed from Cargo Bay 3 had survived. She loaded it without ceremony and watched. The video opened in flickering grayscale. A timestamp marked it as the night of the 11th day, 2 hours before the final encounter. The footage showed the interior of the ship, Myra's temporary shelter visible in the background. The childlike figure sitting near a crate, knees hugged to its chest. It rocked gently back and forth, not speaking, not performing, just existing. Myra leaned forward, studying the creature's body language. The way its hands trembled slightly, the way its breathing faltered, not evenly mimicked but irregular, anxious. She fast-forwarded. 10 minutes later the creature stood. Clutched its chest, collapsed to its knees. It writhed for a moment. Not violently, but as though struggling against something internal. Not a transformation, not mimicry, a kind of pain. And then it cried, not audibly. The feed had no sound. But the movement was unmistakable. Head bowed, shoulders shaking. Hands clawing at its own skin like it was trying to peel something away. And in that moment it looked completely human, not a simulation. Not a projection, just a small, terrified being trying to endure something it didn't understand. Myra's breath caught. She'd seen this exact moment. But not like this, not with stillness, not with time to watch every motion. To let her mind do what her instinct hadn't allowed in the chaos: feel. The video ended as the creature stood up and turned toward the forest. The moment before she had released it, the moment she had made her choice. She leaned back in her chair, hands clasped loosely in her lap, staring at the blank screen. What had it been? A decoy? A weapon? Or a child trying to communicate in the only way its species knew how? What had she been in that moment? A survivor or something else? She closed her eyes. She remembered the way its body had crumbled after the radiation pulse. Remembered the absence of resistance. Remembered the eye that had stayed open, not defiant. Not hateful, just curious and afraid. She whispered into the stillness, "Could I have survived without killing it?" Silence answered. There would be no confirmation, no data logs or DNA scans that could prove what it had felt, what it had been. She had acted in the belief that the creature posed a threat, and maybe it had. But what if it had? What if it had simply waited to see what she would become? She sat there long into the night, the question looping through her mind, not an accusation but a weight. She had made the right decision. The Federation would say so. Tacticians would applaud the clean efficiency of her tactic. Scientists would analyze the radiation field and marvel at her innovation. But she would remember something else: a shape in the dark, a voice that mimicked pain, and a moment when she became something she never wanted to be, a mirror of the very thing she feared. This wasn't a victory born of strength, not of weapons, not of firepower, not of any flag raised over fallen enemies. It was survival born from something quieter, darker, and infinitely harder to accept, the willingness to confront the shadow within oneself. No one blamed Myra Keene. The reports were unanimous. She had done what was necessary. The official verdict, tactical decision justified under threat of imminent termination. Even ethics panels agreed. The creatures were undocumented, unclassified, and had displayed predatory behavior. In every quantifiable metric, her actions were not only logical but commendable. And yet, none of those justifications lived in her heart. Because in the silence that followed the forest's death, in the stillness of the ashes where life had once stirred, there was no sense of triumph, only a gnawing emptiness. She had made a choice, a deliberate one, and no tribunal, no scientific committee could carry its weight for her. The Stalkers had never spoken a word, never issued a threat, never attacked with the mindless brutality of beasts. They watched, they mirrored, they tested, but never outright destroyed. Not until she struck first, and even then the child, if she could call it that, had shown no malice, no resistance. It had approached her not as an assassin but as a question. A creature searching for a shape it didn't yet understand. A species perhaps attempting to communicate in the only language it knew, fear. Was that not how humans had once done it? Terrified tribes raising spears to the unknown sky. Fire used not just to cook, but to scare. Walls built not to protect, but to define what was inside and what was other. Fear, too, was a kind of grammar, and Myra had replied with punctuation she knew well: final, absolute, irreversible. I once created weapons, she had whispered to herself, more confession than memory. And then I ran from them, but even unarmed I still knew how to kill, with knowledge. And that was the truth she couldn't unsee. It wasn't a trigger that destroyed the forest. It was her design, her mind, her training, the precise calculations that turned heat into a scalpel and silence into a grave. She had weaponized survival, and survival had answered her call. But what had it cost? That question echoed louder than any explosion. It followed her through debriefs and data dumps, through sterile bunkrooms and sleepless nights. Not because she didn't believe she had the right to live, but because she wasn't sure she had survived as herself. If humanity's greatest strength was its adaptability, then what was its greatest danger? Perhaps it was this: the ability to justify anything when the threat felt close enough. The Stalkers weren't enemies. They were possibilities, alien, yes, but not evil. Complex, yes, but not cruel. They had probed her not with claws but with mimicry, not to break her, but to learn what she would choose. She had answered with annihilation. Not out of hate, out of fear. And so the final mirror turned not toward them, but toward herself. They hadn't needed to kill her. They had needed her to choose who she really was when stripped of certainty. Her choice had been clear, her cost permanent, and yet in that clarity there was a kind of lesson. A brutal, essential one, because not all monsters come with teeth. Some come with questions, and not all victories come with flags. Some come with the realization that you're still alive, and now must live with what that means. So when she was finally asked, years later, during an off-record interview with an ethics team hoping to compile a human-centric survivor's philosophy, she gave only one response. If you're human, she said, don't ask how much your technology can destroy. Ask whether you can survive without becoming the very thing you fear most. The room fell quiet, and in that quiet something was born, not a conclusion but a challenge. Because survival, in the end, isn't proof of moral superiority. It's just proof of decision, and decisions echo louder than explosions. Myra Keene lived, not as a soldier, not as a hero, not even, perhaps, as a survivor in the traditional sense. She lived as a asterisk witness asterisk, to a moment when two species reached across an incomprehensible divide, and one flinched first. And maybe, in some future where memory outlasts shame, that moment will be told not as a warning, but as a lesson. That empathy is not weakness, that restraint is not surrender. That the real victory, the only one worth keeping, lies not in how many creatures you can kill, but in how many you can choose not to. That is what Myra would say if asked again, and then perhaps she would ask one question in return. Are you sure your fear is of them, or is it of the part of you that wants to become what they already think you are? And if there is silence after that, good, it means the question landed.